Welcome back, where we break down the most important cases in international law without putting you to sleep. Today, we're unpacking the Lotus Case, a 1927 legal showdown between France and Turkey that gave us one of the most famous principles in international law, the Lotus Principle. This case has everything: a tragic accident at sea, an international courtroom battle, and a principle that shaped how countries behave on the high seas and beyond. Let's dive in. It all started on the night of August 2nd, 1926. The French ship SS Lotus was sailing in the Aegean Sea. At the same time, a Turkish steamer called Bozkurt was also navigating those waters. Then, crash. The two vessels collided. The Turkish ship was badly damaged, sank, and tragically, 8 Turkish nationals lost their lives. The Lotus made it safely to Istanbul. But when the French officer on duty, Lieutenant Demons, stepped off the ship, Turkish authorities arrested him for manslaughter. France was outraged. They argued, wait a minute. The collision happened on the high seas, outside any country's territory. Only France, as the flag state of the Lotus, can prosecute its officer. So here's the core dispute. France's argument: on the high seas, only the flag state, the country whose flag the ship flies, has criminal jurisdiction. So only France can try Demons. Turkey's argument: our citizens died in the accident. We have the right to seek justice by prosecuting the officer responsible, even if it happened outside our territory. Since the two states couldn't agree, they took the case to the Permanent Court of International Justice, the PCIJ, basically the International Court of Justice before the ICJ existed. The court had to answer one big question. Did Turkey act contrary to international law by prosecuting a French officer for something that happened on the high seas? The decision came in 1927, and guess what? The court ruled in favor of Turkey. The judges said, there is no rule in international law that prohibits Turkey from prosecuting Demons. And from this they declared the famous Lotus Principle. In international law, states are free to act unless there is an explicit prohibition against it. In other words, unlike domestic law, where your government tells you what you can and can't do, in international law, countries are like free agents. If there's no rule saying you can't, then you can. Now this ruling was super controversial. Critics argued that it gave states too much freedom. Imagine if every country started prosecuting foreigners for things that barely touch their interests. Chaos. Supporters, though, said it recognized state sovereignty, the freedom of countries to act without constantly being told no by international law. Here's the twist. The Lotus Principle didn't stay supreme forever. In 1958, the Geneva Conventions on the Law of the Sea restricted jurisdiction on the high seas. In 1982, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, made it clear. Normally, only the flag state has criminal jurisdiction over incidents on the high seas. So today, Turkey's move in the Lotus case probably wouldn't fly. The principle has been narrowed and limited. So why do law students and lawyers still obsess over this case nearly a century later? Because the Lotus case highlights some of the fundamental tensions in international law: sovereignty versus order, how much freedom should states have versus how much structure should the international system impose, silence of the law. When international law is silent, do we assume freedom or do we assume restriction? Evolution of law. The case shows how international law isn't static. It changes through treaties, practice, and new court decisions. Think of it like a giant playground. In domestic law, there's a teacher who says, don't run, don't fight, don't chew gum. In international law, there's no teacher, it's just kids on the playground. Unless the kids all agree on a rule, you can pretty much do whatever you want. The Lotus case basically said, unless we've all agreed to forbid something, states can go ahead and do it. It's freedom, with a side of potential chaos. And that, my friends, is the story of the Lotus case, the ship collision that changed the way we think about international law. Do you think the court was right to give states so much freedom back in 1927? Or do you think that was a recipe for international disaster? Drop your thoughts in the comments, smash that like button if you learned something new, and subscribe for more stories where law meets history. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.